Hi, Roger. I just wanted to ask you, whether during this global pandemic that we're having, if your HD research has been affected in any way.
Yeah, well, as you might expect, it obviously has. So we've had to suspend all of our clinical studies. We're not allowed in the labs at the moment, but that doesn't mean that we've stopped doing research. So as you'll see in this short video that follows, you'll understand how different people of the group have used this time to better analyse their data, look back at some of the things they've been trying to understand and where they've got to with their research. So I think you'll find this is an exciting little insight how much research we've actually managed to do on Hunter's disease in the last few weeks during this pandemic.
Everyone, my name's Sam. Some of you might recognise me from memory tests and other study assessments that you might have done in Professor Barker's Huntington's disease clinic. During the lockdown, I've been working on looking at the results of a study we've been doing on decision making. And we're interested in decision making because we know that the decisions that we make in life, for example, what to spend our money on, where to go, who to see, what to do each day, affect how we feel and our quality of life. So we're interested in investigating how people do this. And we're doing this in this particular study by asking people to make a simple decision about what they've seen. So if you can see my slide, this is a bit like this image here on the left, where some people see two white faces looking at each other, and other people see a black vase, and sometimes people see both, or it might change. So we ask people to make a decision like this about what they've seen, and then we ask them to reflect on that decision. So we ask them how sure they are about that. And then we're also interested in seeing whether the ability to be able to do these two things is related to other more general decision making in daily life, or perhaps people's mood or their anxiety.
Hello, my name's Sarah and I'm a postdoc in Professor Barker's lab. I've worked with Roger for about 15 years now, so I've probably met many of you in clinic over that time. My research has always focused on trying to understand how having Huntington's disease might affect the way in which people think. So really about how they solve problems, how they how their memory works, how they're able to focus their attention on different objects and ignore things that are irrelevant to them. During this lockdown, I've been using my time to work on a project that we had funded by the Huntington's Disease Association a couple of years ago. And that project was designed to understand how these changes in the way people with Huntington's think might affect the way they make decisions about their money, and whether those changes might make them more vulnerable to financial scams and abuse that's out there at the moment. The motivation for this project really came from conversations that we had with patients in clinic and their families who identified lots of different areas where people's decision making to do with financial decisions had changed. So it may be for some people that they were spending lots of money where they previously had been very conscientious about their money. It may be for some people that they were making big purchases that were inappropriate, for example, buying a car when they didn't have a driving license. For some people, it really was that they were trusting their money with people who everybody else could see weren't trustworthy, and there was no real reason that they should have been allowed to have access to their money. We started this project because we wanted to try and find a way that we could understand what was going on so that we could then share that information and use that information to try and make sure that we could try and keep people safe for as long as possible. So the project itself was designed to gather information about how everybody made decisions about their money and what factors influenced the way we made decisions, and then to look to see whether that changed, so whether that was different in people with Huntington's compared to people who didn't have Huntington's disease. We were also interested to see whether those changes happened in parallel with other changes in the disease. So was this something to do with the way that Huntington's disease progressed, or was it that some people were more likely to experience these changes than other people? And really we wanted to find any factors that could predict who would experience these changes, maybe when they would happen, and what type of changes they might experience, so what type of an impact that might have on their financial decision making. So the project itself had multiple different parts. So some of it was face-to-face testing on a computer, some of it was face-to-face testing on paper and pencil tasks, and there were some group activities. We were also interested in running a series of focus groups to talk to people in the Huntington's disease community to see what their experience was of financial decision making and whether they had had personal experiences of how that changed over the course of the disease, and whether there were things that they were particularly worried about and they wanted to share with us. There's also an aspect of the study that's looking at existing data, so data that we already hold as part of the Enroll HD study, and trying to use that to understand what other changes happen in the disease around about the same point that people start to become uncertain about making decisions about their money. Now, obviously, as a result of the coronavirus and the lockdown, lots has changed about the way that we are able to interact with our money now. And because of social distancing, that will probably stay the same for quite some time. So a lot of banking has gone online, a lot of financial reimbursements gone online, a lot of shopping and transactions are now done remotely or online or by people who are doing them on our behalf. So because of that, we feel that actually this study is probably even more relevant now than it was when we first started it. So what I've been focusing my time on is trying to understand how I can change this study so that we can still deliver and run the project in the way that we were hoping to do before. And that might be by running those focus groups online, like this, via Zoom or Skype. It might be about trying to do testing over the phone or by post instead of doing it face-to-face in clinic like we had done before. But rest assured, we are still carrying on with this study, and we're very excited about the work that we're about to do, and we hope that it will be a really useful addition to help people with Huntington's to live better for longer. If you'd like to know more about the study, or if you'd just like to share with me some of your experiences about financial changes and financial decision making, I've put up my email address here and the best number to contact us on, and we'd love to hear from you.
Hello, my name is Alice. I'm a PhD student in Professor Barker's research group, and during this lockdown I've been working on building a new smartphone app to help with decision making. So why build an app to help with decision making? So we've got some evidence that people both with and without HD can make suboptimal decisions. We know this because patients in clinic tell us this, as Sarah mentioned in her talk. There have been lots and lots of past research studies conducted around the world into thinking, into cognition, which suggest that people with Huntington's disease might make suboptimal decisions. And we've also got some of our own ongoing research studies, as Sam and Sarah mentioned, and also some work that I'm doing as part of my PhD. So how could we intervene perhaps to help with decision making? An app, you see, is good because it can be very specific and it can make things very simple. It also allows users to keep their autonomy, but also in a very safe and controlled way. So how do you go about building an app? Well, the idea I've come up with is to scan documents, maybe letters that you get through the post, emails, or screenshots, to identify actionable words and phrases. The app, very simply, then rates the severity of those words and phrases with a traffic light system, where red would be do something now about this document, and green would be this is probably not a big concern. So how have I gone about this? Well, I've been working with another PhD student from the Department of Physics at the University of Cambridge called Takatomo Izuzawa. Taki's helped me with writing the underlying code for this app, and then together we've been working on the user interface. That's so the app looks good, is easy to use, and it's effective in what it does. We've also taken quite a lot of time to consider safety, security, and privacy concerns regarding the data within the app. And we've created some diagrams to understand how the data is moving about. So here's a short demo of the app. You can see that the user can take a photo with a single tap. The app scans the document, and then it gives the user a rating. In this case, the rating is red. This document would require urgent attention. So as lockdown continues, we'll continue to develop this new app, and we will start to lay the groundwork to set up a study to test to see if it works. Do get in touch with us via email, via Twitter, or through our website if you have any thoughts on this new app. Thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Kate Harris, and I'm currently conducting a study that's looking at the role of dopamine in cognition in Huntington's disease. Dopamine is a chemical in the brain that's very important for processes such as movement, reward processing, and also cognition. And the purpose of this study is to see what happens when we manipulate the levels of dopamine in the brain in Huntington's, and to see how this affects cognitive impairments. So during this study, participants who are HD gene carriers and also age-matched controls visit our clinic 5 times, and the first is for a screening visit, and then on the four subsequent visits they either take a drug that increases dopamine, a drug that decreases dopamine, both of these together, or a placebo pill. And importantly, the drugs only have an influence for a few hours, so any of the effects are extremely temporary. And after they take the pill, they have a 90-minute break, and then after this 90 minutes, they take a battery of cognitive tasks which are performed on a computer. And these tasks have been chosen because they've been shown by other studies to require dopaminergic signalling. So this study is currently halfway through, and we're hoping to resume it shortly.
Hello everyone, I'm Zanna. I'm one of the doctors and clinical fellows in Rogers Group, and I'm studying specifically sleep in Huntington's disease. There are a number of reasons why we think this is a really important thing to study. So we know that people with Huntington's disease develop quite abnormal sleep, but we also know that that can occur way before some of the key features of Huntington's disease develop, so in what we call the pre-manifest phase. And actually we know those abnormalities can occur in people who think they're sleeping very well. And this is important for a number of reasons. Firstly, we know that sleep abnormalities are a huge quality of life issue for a number of people living with Huntington's, and not just them but also their families living in the same household as someone with disrupted sleep. But also there's growing evidence that those sleep abnormalities might be exacerbating some of the symptoms of Huntington's disease, so things like mood problems and some of the cognitive and thinking problems. If that's the case, it's obviously very important, because if we can intervene and improve people's sleep, we might be able to improve those kinds of symptoms. There is also some suggestion that those sleep abnormalities might even be accelerating disease onset or progression. That's not for certain yet, but if it's the case, obviously it's something we really need to know about, so we can try to intervene. There's also the argument that because these sleep abnormalities occur before some of the key features of Huntington's, it might help us better predict when those onset of symptoms might occur, so it's a very important prediction tool as well. So there are a couple of ways in which we're studying sleep in Huntington's. The first is through a very long-standing, long-running observational study that's been going since 2007. That's with a group of our pre-manifest patients from the clinic, 31 of whom we've been studying since 2007. And in this study, those participants wear an ActiWatch, which is a movement-sensitive device on their wrist to look at activity levels in the day and night. And also they come into a specialised sleep lab and sleep for 1 or 2 nights with specialist electrodes on their head to measure their sleep. That study, we've done 3 time points already, and now we're conducting what's likely to be the final time point 14 years later to complete that study. And that gives us really useful insights into how those sleep abnormalities evolve and how they compare to symptom onset and how things progress over time. That's going to be the first study of its kind longitudinally, because everything else has been cross-sectional in time. The second thing that we're wanting to do is to run a small trial of a potential treatment for sleep, and that's in the form of dream headset devices, which are very specialist headset devices worn during sleep that monitor your sleep and give you a profile of what your sleep is like. And in response to that, it delivers a very personalised, tailor-made sleep therapy plan as to how you can improve your sleep. But even better than that, it also does a very clever mechanism where it augments and improves your sleep by delivering harmless pulses of sound through bone conduction during your sleep that's proven to increase the depth of sleep and may improve things like memory. The third thing we're doing is a study based in blood tests, where we're looking at the expression of what are called clock genes, which are genes that control everyone's 24-hour rhythm. So as part of one of the studies, we will be taking blood tests a few times during the night and into the following morning, and looking at how those clock genes behave over time compared to people who don't have Huntington's disease. All three of these studies will be the very first of their kind, so we're really hopeful and excited about what they're going to tell us about sleep in Huntington's and how it can improve patients' lives. So just to finish, thank you so much to everyone who's already involved in these, and I look forward to taking things further. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Katie and I'm a research assistant in the Barker Group. So I work on the clinical trials in Huntington's disease, so mainly the antisense therapy trials. So as a site, we've been involved from the start with the Ionis first-in-human trial back in 2016. And over the years, this has progressed into the new Roche trials that are currently ongoing. So we have patients enrolled in the GenExtend trial. So this is the open label study, meaning all patients receive active drug. And we also have patients enrolled into the Generation HD1 study, which is the double-blind placebo-controlled study, meaning that we don't know whether the patient is on active drug or placebo. So usually we would see our patients every 8 weeks in Cambridge for their follow-up assessments. However, due to the current situation, these have been put on hold. So we've been conducting remote visits and doing some assessments over the phone with the patients and just keeping in touch to try and collect as much data as possible. So once we reopen, we hope that the trial visits will be able to get back up and running as soon as possible. Thank you.
We're currently conducting a phase 2A clinical trial looking at the effects of a drug called neflamapimod on the cognitive impairments which can occur in early stage Huntington's disease. So this drug has previously been shown to reduce inflammation in an area of the brain called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is known to be very important for memory and also for spatial navigation. And both of these processes can be impaired in early stage Huntington's disease. So during this clinical trial, there are 2 10-week treatment periods which are separated by an 8-week washout period. And during the treatment periods, the participants either take neflamapimod or a placebo pill, and both myself and the participant are blind to what they're taking. And during these treatment periods, the participants visit our clinic once a month, and during this visit, we do a variety of different motor and cognitive tasks. And the cognitive tasks we use involve memory and also spatial memory. This trial is currently ongoing.
Well, as you can see, we've been extremely busy looking at all the data we've collected over the last few months and years around Huntington's disease project. We're obviously trying to better understand problems with thinking and what that means, how we can better treat this. And obviously, we've reactivated our study on sleep. So I hope you found it interesting. There's lots going on. We can't wait to get back into the lab and in the clinic to continue with this. But obviously, if you have any questions, queries, or anything else relating to research we do around Huntington's disease, then obviously contact us, and the slide will appear now, which gives you the possible links by which you can do that. So you've heard all about the exciting work that's been going on whilst we've been in lockdown. I thought it might be useful just to have a bit of a sort of question and answer session now, just to sort of drill down a bit on some of the issues that people have been doing. So I thought I would start with Charlene, who has been the mastermind behind this whole production that we've put up on our website today. So Charlene, just tell me why you thought this was a good idea, where you got the idea from, and what you're hoping to achieve by doing it.
So we find ourselves in a very surreal situation. And although this is something we would probably do in a more face-to-face fashion, I thought, seeing as we're at home, it's HD Awareness Month, and to speak out for HD, I thought it might be quite nice to try and do something online which everyone can access. And mainly it was actually a way to say thank you to all those incredible people who do actually volunteer their time to come and do our research and take part in it. And of course, I have to say thank you to everyone on this call, because it wouldn't have been possible if you weren't enthusiastic and willing to be involved. So I'm hoping it's just something that will give information to the wider community about what we've been doing during lockdown.
Thanks very much. I think it's been a terrific idea, and it's been great listening to what everyone has been up to. But someone who wasn't on that video, who has been involved with our Huntington's disease clinic for as long as I have, which is quite a few years, is Sue Hill. And Sue, as you know, works for the Huntington's Disease Association. So Sue, what have you been up to during this period of lockdown?
I've been confined to my office, which for a nurse is really difficult. And just sitting here fielding people's calls, talking to them. We're running things quite differently now, because we've had to learn how to do webinars. Instead of going out to nursing homes, we're doing it online. It's just been working actually quite differently.
And in terms of the clients getting in touch with you, have you had much interaction with patients, families, carers and such like during this time?
Yes, and not just in my area, because half the team's on furlough, so the rest of us are covering the whole country. So some people are having to talk to me, and when they've never met me, they don't know me, I don't cover their area. But it seems to have been working okay. I've had, particularly at the beginning, we would have phone calls all day, but now people have mostly sorted out the issues. It hasn't been quite so busy. I think people were getting letters, and some people got letters when they'd had a positive test but had no symptoms and they were told to self-isolate. Other people who were quite well onto the illness and weren't getting any letters at all, so then they didn't know what to do. People who were living on their own were being told not to go out, and they said, how do I get food? So there's a lot of very practical things to talk about and think about at the beginning, but I think mostly things have been settling, and there's no respite for the carers either, because there's no respite care, no daycare, so that's impacted on carers. And in a couple of cases, I've got a couple of clients who, one has died, two more are quite poorly, and it's people who are looking after them without the care packages sometimes, because they haven't come in, and they're managing the deterioration of somebody on their own. So we've sometimes had long talks just to listen and just to help them get through a very difficult time.
Thanks, Phil. I mean, certainly we've been running clinics via phone and such like over this period of time, and it's been quite interesting, the different experiences people have had, exactly as you're saying. Some have had letters, some have not. People are very confused as to who should have letters. As I point out, the government are confused about this as well. There has been this problem with social distancing. I have to say that people are very familiar. I have had several of the clients quite like it, because they don't particularly like people and meeting with people. So this has been absolutely heaven for them, that they're allowed to stay indoors and do nothing. So it's been a very mixed bag, I would say, of how people have reacted to it. But I mean, you've done a terrific job to supporting those people. So thank you for doing that. And I was now going to ask Sarah, actually, because one of the issues which you raised, Sue, about how people cope with this, which are around decisions, financial issues and such like. I mean, Sarah, your work has very much concentrated perhaps on the non-classical cognitive problems. We always think about, you know, when you go for a memory test, that's what it is. But you've been trying to look at the slightly sort of higher order thinking problems. And I suppose it would be useful to know how you arrived at the sort of project that you did, and what impact you think that will have, especially as we go forward out of the coronavirus.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're completely right, Roger. The things that I have always been interested in are how these higher order problems make it much harder for people with Huntington's disease and their families to live an everyday normal life like the rest of us do. And the motivation very much came out of conversations that we had in clinic and experiences that we had with patients and their families, things that were being reported to us. And it started off really with a series of behaviours where patients who had previously been very conscientious about their money had got themselves into a pattern of spending large amounts of money when they didn't have it. Often that was in secret, people didn't know, until they received these really high credit card bills, for example, and they'd incurred an awful lot of debt. It was people buying large purchases, for example, buying a car or a motorbike when they just had their driving license taken away. So that was initially where the whole project started from. And then as we started to delve into that a little bit more, it became almost like a Pandora's box. The more we opened, the more we realized that actually this was quite a common problem, and it happens at varying different levels. So for some people it is about obsessively buying things, so buying multiple versions of the same object, repeatedly buying watches over and over again, and having a stockpile of watches in their house, or deciding that they needed a new toaster and having 25 of them arrive over a course of a couple of weeks. And the question really came then was that because they didn't value the money they were spending, or was it because actually it's quite an abstract process now that we buy things online, we buy things over the phone, money goes out via a credit card or a debit card, and there's no real loss of money. So is it that it's that abstract process that people are finding really hard, or is it that it's actually to do with their appreciation of money and the financial implications, or is it that they've got a change in their risk ratios, that they're really not bothered by risk as much anymore, and that links in with the impulsivity that we often see in our patients. And so really we just developed a series of research around those questions.
And how much do you think this is going to be an issue going forward? Because, you know, as we've just heard from Sue, a lot of people are quite isolated because of the lockdown. And so decisions are having to be made to some extent in isolation, although obviously Sue's doing a terrific job supporting the community out there. But as we move forward, and obviously we've heard a lot about, fraudulent activity around PPE and other issues. Do you think this is going to become an issue? And do you think your research will help us understand that better?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. There was something in the news just today looking at the sheer volume of internet fraud that's happened, and the amount of money that's been lost as a country in a whole, and that's for everybody. That's not just people with Huntington's disease. I think the way that the virus has changed the way that we work. So even within the university, we're now having to process travel expense claims all remotely and online, which is very challenging for somebody with Huntington's disease. And if they haven't got a support network and somebody there to oversee those decisions and that process, is becoming increasingly difficult. And I think the reality is that even if we do go back to any degree of normality, I think the opportunity will be taken by people like the banks and a lot of the shops to actually keep some of these systems and these online processes. And I think it's really important that we look to see whether we can safeguard our patients as much as possible. What we're hoping that will come out of the research is a way of really being able to not just predict which of our patients may experience these problems, but to be able to look for some early warning signs that we can share with families and the patients, so that we can pick this up and help support people and educate people and the banks and the community before it becomes too much of a problem.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I must admire the birds in your garden, who seem to be particularly vocal this afternoon. But the sort of work you're doing, I mean, obviously, if we could have a better way of protecting people. And Alice, I think this is something which, with your app is one of your ambitions, that we can actually help people detect the type of problems that Sarah is trying to sort of quantify, if you like, with her research.
Yeah, definitely. I think the idea for the app, kind of tying in what you and Sue were saying about receiving letters, when we receive letters that contain a lot of information, it can be hard to kind of distill out the most important information within that letter. So the app is hopefully one solution to some of the problems Sarah was just describing, to kind of highlight the particular bits of information that are important and that need to be addressed now, and then maybe something that's a little less important that can wait for a bit.
And do you think the problems that our sort of clients, our sort of patients have with decision making, which obviously in the financial world we've been discussing, do you think this is the same across all types of decisions? I mean, do we make different types of decisions? Because obviously if I decide to cross the road, that's rather different to deciding whether I'm going to take on Alice to do a PhD.
That's a good question. We look at, well, what I've been using as a framework for decision making is that we kind of have these two decision systems. So we make some really quick decisions, say we're just crossing the road, you just check for cars and then you go, you don't think about it too much. But whereas if you're deciding to choose to do a PhD, you want to put a lot of thought into that, because it's no small feat. It takes a while. It might be affected by a large pandemic. So you need to put a lot more thought and lots more thinking into that. So we make most of our decisions with that quick system, and then some of them we do need to really think about it. And it's about making sure the right decisions fall into either of those categories.
And is that something you've been exploring within the sort of Huntington's community, whether there are deficits across all types of decisions, sort of reflex decisions, if you like, versus these much more complicated ones? And do you see any difference as you've looked at patients and such like?
Yeah. Another good question. That's a study that's kind of ongoing and hoping to be finished once we can get back to work a little bit. But what we're seeing is that whether it's someone with Huntington's disease or someone who's a healthy 18-year-old or someone with Parkinson's disease, even lots of the variables in our decisions, maybe, for example, how much something costs, they often, that's not the driving factor across those different groups as to how we make a decision. But perhaps instead something that might drive a difference in decisions is how much time we're given, or how much information we're faced with when we're making that decision.
So, I mean, Sam, your work to some extent has sort of taken this in a slightly different direction, if you like. Obviously, when we make decisions and then we move on. But most of us, not perhaps when we're crossing the road, but thinking about PhDs, will reflect back on, have we taken everything into account? What do we really think about that? We may seek out advice of others. I mean, your work has to some extent sort of touched upon this.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, there's a couple of things there. Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that the work that I've been doing, the study sort of supports what's just been said about how, and the stuff that Alice is doing about trying to use an app to sort of change how information might be presented to people. Some of our early results have shown that some people with Huntington's disease might show differences in their ability to process the information that's given to them, basically. And then, as you say, on top of that, what's really important when we're making decisions is how we reflect on them. So we've been trying to sort of assess that specifically, how well people can reflect on a decision they've just made. And I think, going back to some of the things that Sarah said about making sort of repetitive decisions, perhaps. I think, how well we're able to reflect on those would probably be a very important factor in whether we continue to do them. So, yeah, in a way, I suppose my study has been sort of trying to go back to basics a little bit and trying to work out how people vary on those quite simple things, like how well you can reflect on the decision you've just made.
And do you think that what you see is something unique to Huntington's disease, or do you think actually we all presumably have different levels of reflecting on decision, and does the disease just amplify what was already there, or does it actually lead to new problems, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in a way,
with just what we've done, that's a very good question, and can't really answer that just from my study alone. But I think you're right that actually, in general, people all vary on the ability to do this. And you're right that it might just be that for some people with Huntington's disease, combined with certain circumstances in their life, this ability might change to do with all sorts of different things. And of course, when you place people in the real world where they have, real stresses and some of the things that Sue was talking about with the lockdown, which affect, daily life, that's also going to have an impact on our daily, the way that we make these decisions daily. So I think it's probably not necessarily a thing that's related to Huntington's disease per se, and it might be something that people with other or similar diseases also face similar challenges with. But it's a continuum of things that we all have to do in daily life. Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. I mean, Sue, can I just come back to you and say, obviously we've been talking about how we're trying to define problems with making these higher level decisions, financial decisions, reflecting on decisions, using sort of apps to try and help people. I mean, you obviously see it from a slightly different perspective because you're out there seeing people in the community. How big a problem do you see this within the HD community? And do you see this becoming more of a problem as we've moved away, as Sarah says, to a more remote, computer-based, electronic-based sort of society?
I think it has got more people can accumulate. So I know maybe the same person Sarah knows with 80 watches, getting them all because they can do it behind people's backs, and you can even if they're given a certain amount of money because somebody's taken control of that, they can still buy things online without having to have physical cash actually in their bank account. So you can still run up lots of bills with Amazon, etc. And I've had somebody also with a house full of aquariums. No money, he had lots of aquariums because that's what he wanted, and they're quite expensive. So I do have people with collections, and it just because you haven't got to go to the shops, I think it is quite a big problem. It's also open to abuse because ex-partners, etc., once they know the number, they can go and just clear people's accounts and take what they want on a regular basis. So it has got, it's certainly got a lot easier. And when it comes to taking risks, what a number of people have explained over the years is somebody explained it very clearly. She said, I know I go to cross the road, I see a car coming, I know I shouldn't cross the road, but I do anyway. And that comes out in all different ways. So I guess it's the same with the distancing that we're all trying to do now. People know the theory, they've heard it, they've said they understood it, but they don't take any notice. It doesn't go into action. So I think that's quite a lot of, with the money and with other things as well. And with the money, there's also not only the client, there's the people around them, there's people who take their money. And I've been a bit shocked over the years as how often family do that.
Thanks, Sue. So one of the other areas which we've been particularly interested over the years in Huntington's disease is, apart from these higher level sort of cognitive problems, is sleep. And, many years ago, we did a study where we were transplanting cells into the brain, and we wanted to try and work out what effect it would have on movement. So we used a thing called an ActiWatch, which, can you believe it, is in the world before there were Fitbits. And what we discovered with that was that it was actually useless at trying to measure the movement which people make with Huntington's disease, but revealed that things were abnormal at night. People were moving in their sleep at night when they should have been asleep, which opened up a whole sort of idea that sleep may be a problem in Huntington's disease. And so, Zana, this is something you have recently taken on as your challenge, is to try and tell us and understand what sleep abnormalities exist in Huntington's disease and then what that means. So how has that been going?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky that actually there's been quite a lot I can get on with during lockdown, and that's partly thanks to the flexibility of the participants in my study. So we've moved to doing a lot of the clinical assessments in the longitudinal study via video call, which has actually worked really well. And the actigraphy that you just mentioned, where people wear devices on their wrists at home, we've been able to do by sending devices out to them from home. So that's been continuing. So yes, I'm very fortunate, and I'm very grateful to those participants for making that possible.
And what do you anticipate are the problems with sleep? Do you think this is just people are a bit anxious, a bit depressed, so they sort of wake up a bit early, but actually sleep problems in Huntington's disease are just what you'd expect? Or do you think it's actually a part of the condition? And if so, what's the significance of that?
So I think it is fundamentally part of the pathology and not just a secondary effect of things like depression and anxiety. Certainly there is an element of that. But all the evidence that we have points to the fact that the actual fundamental biological process of Huntington's causes some breakdown in the sleep networks of the brain and causes disruption of sleep. And importantly, that seems to be occurring in people who think they're sleeping well, who are not aware that actually their sleep is very poor. Because even if you're sleeping continuously for 6 hours, when we look at that with EEG, etc., we can see that the structure of that is completely awry. So that's partly why it's so important, is that it's not just a case of people knowing that they're sleeping badly and seeking help for it. It's actually identifying people who we may be able to help, who think they're well. And that's important for two reasons, because we think that the sleep deprivation is contributing to some of the clinical features of Huntington's. So for instance, it links in with decision making. So because we know that even in healthy individuals, if you sleep deprive someone, they become more impulsive. They have problems with executive function, so balancing up risk and benefit and making quite, abstract decisions. But also, the mood drops, become apathetic, etc. So it all plays into decision making. Of course, it's not the whole answer, but part of the reason we're looking at this is that we think that by treating sleep, we might be able to ameliorate some of that burden. And decision making is just one part of that. We know that there are lots of other clinical features of HD which are probably worsened by chronic sleep deprivation. So that's why we want to try and treat this. But there is also the possibility that sleep deprivation may be exacerbating, accelerating the disease process directly as well. And if that's the case, obviously it's really important that we try and intervene and improve sleep to try and slow that process down.
And so poor sleep, which of course is becoming slightly endemic in this world where we have television and, Netflix and emails and everything, social media goes on 24/7. I mean, presumably whilst this speaks to Huntington's disease, sleep is a sort of fundamental process we need for our brains to work properly. And what would you say that you think, I mean, you've already talked a little bit that, if you're sleep deprived, you have these problems. What do you think is the fundamental function of sleep? Why do we sleep?
Oh, it's such a huge ranging process. That's the thing, is that it's not just neurological, it's the whole body system is dependent on sleep. So, 10% of all your genes in your body are influenced by sleep. So there's huge evidence that it influences cardiovascular risk, diabetes, immune function, etc. So we need to stop thinking about sleep as just a neurological thing, but a whole body process. But on a neurological basis, the functions that it supplies is hugely wide-ranging in terms of memory consolidation, in terms of waste clearance, in terms of rebalancing affect and mood. So it's a can of worms, but a very important can of worms to be addressing. And it's exciting that it is one of those frontiers that is across the spectrum of health science at the moment, that it's becoming one of those lifestyle factors that is as fundamental as diet and exercise, that sleep health is now becoming the thing to think about.
And it's very important for memory, isn't it? That would be...
Yeah, absolutely. So it links in very nicely with some of the other work we're doing, particularly, as I'm sure Kate will be about to speak about, is that we know that in Huntington's sleep becomes very fragmented. And there's some evidence that sleep fragmentation in particular affects spatial working memory, which is very interesting because that's what Kate has found as a feature of Huntington's. And it's both working memory, so sort of short-term juggling things in your mind memory, but also memory consolidation. So actually, remembering things from days to weeks. So absolutely, even though my research might seem kind of in a little corner on its own, it actually links in very nicely both with decision-making and the memory work that we're doing.
So that introduces Kate rather nicely. So Kate, tell us what you found. I mean, I know you've spoken a little bit about it in terms of sort of how we think about memory. I mean, what Zanna was saying, there's obviously working memory, things like, keeping a telephone number in your head and things like that. And then there's memory for episodes, and then there's memory for sort of how you navigate around the world. So just sort of, it would be useful just to sort of hear how your work's developed around some of that, and whether that's led to any, trials and such like to try and improve that, and how common this is in Huntington's disease.
So often when we would speak to our patients and they would talk about that they would have difficulty in spatial navigation or maybe remembering where objects are in space. And this made us think that this could be related to an area of the brain called the hippocampus, because it's been shown that the hippocampus is critical for these kind of functions as well as other memory functions in general. So as a lab, we've been working on this for a few years, testing HD patients on different kinds of spatial memory tests. And then recently we started a clinical trial basically trying to improve the function of the hippocampus, testing a drug that's been shown to be efficient in Alzheimer's disease.
And how common do you think these hippocampal problems are in Huntington's disease? I mean, most people know about the hippocampus because there was a study, very famous study a number of years ago, that London taxi drivers have a very big hippocampus because they obviously have to drive around all the streets in London. It could be that they just talk a lot, and it could be related to speech rather than navigation. But people think of that part of the brain as being involved in spatial navigation. Do you think this is only found in a few people with Huntington's disease when they've got it in an advanced state? Do you think it's an early problem? Do you think it relates to what Zanna's finding with sleep? Do you think it relates to some of the work we heard from Sarah and Alice and Sam on these higher levels, that there's problems in these areas that all happen at the same time? What have you found so far in terms of when it occurs and how bad is it?
Yeah, I think that it's relatively common, and it seems to can occur in the very early stages of the disease. So this is what we found when we were recruiting for our clinical trial, and we were testing a lot of patients that visited our clinic on these kind of tasks. So I think that it's an early feature, not for everybody, but for some people. And yeah, it could definitely be related to sleep, because there's a lot of evidence to show, as we discussed, that while we're sleeping, the memories become strengthened, and that's one of the primary purposes of sleep.
And with the drug trial, you're saying we're trying this drug, which is an Alzheimer's disease. I mean, how is that trial going, and how has COVID helped you or not helped you with that trial?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was ongoing, and now it has had to be paused. But it was quite fortunate in the timing, in the sense that the trial has 2 treatment periods, and for most of the participants in the trial were in the washout period when the lockdown was announced. So we do hope to resume it as soon as we can. So it's not been affected in any bad way. It just means that we'll get the results a little bit later than we expected.
So this is obviously a trial which is looking to try and improve some aspect of Huntington's disease, namely memory. So Katie, I mean, you've been more involved with trials where we've been trying to not necessarily just improve memory, but actually try and stop the disease or slow the disease down. So, I mean, how have those trials gone? Have they been startlingly successful? Have they been very difficult? And how has COVID interfered with your work?
Yeah, so we are involved in the Roche GenExtend trial and also the Roche Generation HD1 trial. So up until lockdown, the trials were running smoothly. We see our patients usually every 8 weeks, where they come to Cambridge for lots of different assessments, these being motor, cognitive. We take some blood samples, and our patients have the lumbar punctures. So when we went into lockdown, obviously the trial visits then went on hold, and we've been trying to do as much as we can remotely. So our participants have all been really, really great, and they've been willing to do what assessments we can over the phone. We keep in touch with them as much as possible, just to try and collect as much data as we can. They're all doing okay in lockdown, which, as we've discussed, it can be difficult. But they're all being really helpful with obviously what we never anticipated when we enrolled into this trial.
And when do you think things will start again? I mean, obviously it's impossible to be certain about anything in the current sort of climate, but here we are at the end of May. It's been at least 2 to 3 months that we've been in this sort of state. Do you see this the trial starting again in the next few weeks, or do you think we're still months away from that?
So we use the research facility,
where all of our trial visits take place, and we're hoping that they will be able to start up again in the next couple of months. So like you said, it's sort of impossible to say exactly when, but we will be starting them up as a priority as soon as we can once we reopen.
Thanks very much, and thank you all very much for sharing your research in this sort of video format and answering questions. I will just sort of conclude by saying I want to thank you all for your continued work in the lockdown. I'd like to thank all of the patients and families who have helped us with the research over the years. Thank you for all answering your phone when I've called you with the telephone consultations. I don't exactly know what will happen with our clinics here. They will carry on as they are doing, and I particularly want to thank Sarah and Katie for making sure that they've been working very smoothly. We will continue to do telephone clinics. We will continue to do video clinics. I hope to start face-to-face clinics in a couple of months' time if the hospital allow it. But it's also an opportunity for you to feed back to us how you've found these new types of clinics and whether there are other things we can do to try and improve what we can deliver for you, especially when we have to do it remotely. So thank you all very much, and we wish you all the very best as we enter into this new phase where we're coming out of this lockdown period.